So, as controversial as this might be with some high power owners, um, what we can say is if you have a $3,000 high power with a professionally fitted barrel, or a $4,000 high power with a professionally fitted barrel, do not heat these things up, and preferably get those barrels out of there, especially if you can put that barrel in and there is absolutely no margin. There's nothing. That can be caused by one of those lugs being spot on and the other one being loose. You see, when you are not working with these cutouts between the lugs, you have the potential, among other things, you can have mismatches. So one hits this tolerance, the other one hits this tolerance, but neither one of them fit particularly well with the recesses. Approaching this from the wrong direction gets you the wrong answer, and that's what we've determined is causing this premature wear of the slide recesses. And there's been a lot of these barrels that have been sold. A lot of people talk about, well, it was drop in and I went shooting and everything was fine, and everything very well may be fine. If you have an exceptionally tight fit in that high power, I would encourage you to take it somewhere and get yourself a little margin so you don't have these edges of these lugs acting like a cutter when the mechanism is forcing that slide as it's heating up, as it's expanding. Again, I want to take this subject back to the 1911 momentarily, and I want to explain to you what the 30 whatever manufacturers of 1911s, how they treat John Browning's blueprint work. And again, 1911 blueprints are available. Find them online. You'll find them. They're free. They're everywhere. They're no secret. They haven't been a secret since they were made back in the war days in the early 1900s. The high power is exactly the opposite in this respect. Anybody who has attempted to better the high power, upgrade, optimize the high power, has been literally working starting from square one. And ultimately, they had to guess about margins. And what do I mean they had to guess about margins? Okay, let's say that the slide recesses here, their margins are, this needs to be, the measurement for the slide recesses needs to be 4.10 with a plus or minus of 0.05 millimeters. So we can be 4.05 to 4.15. You can't know that unless you maybe, I don't know, get 1,000 high power slides and measure all of them and develop your highs and your lows. In other words, having a high power slide or 10 doesn't really help you all that much, because you're only going to have however many high powers you have to take that measurement again and again and again. And you're never going to know for sure what the bullseye is. So what happened over the years is aftermarket barrel makers started getting the idea that, one way to go about this, and they were right, one way to go about this is to overmake these lugs on purpose so that they'll need to be fitted into the slide. And this is an approach. These aftermarket makers had no way to know at that time that at FN in Herstal, Belgium, they were not doing manual fitting, handgun to handgun to handgun, of these slide lugs to the recesses. The blueprints for the recesses between the lugs, and then for the lugs themselves, or the result, which would be for the lugs themselves, These never need manual fitting. In other words, if somebody takes a caliper and that measures, this is good and it's going to work because it's per the spec of the blueprint. Why is that so critical with the high power? It's considered critical with every 1911 maker who makes a 1911. They look at those blueprints, and this is going to sound a little dramatic, but it's absolutely the truth. They look at John Browning's blueprints like they are the Word of God. When it comes to the 1911 pistol, the objective is to make that blueprint as perfectly to conformity to the Word of God as possible, and you have a more and most possible perfect 1911. It's astounding today, 110 years, 109 years later, that work that a man did in 1910 can still be regarded as this. And still yet today in 2020, I haven't heard anybody even offer an explanation for how did he do what he did. All that we know is what he did was astoundingly consistently perfect once it was released and once it was done. And he had barrel experience by this time. He had a lot of experience with expansion of metal and what that means. Anybody who's made an aftermarket barrel to this point has had to guess. They had no choice. And it would not matter if you had all of Donald Trump's money and all the technology that China ever stole. You can't get this perfect by reverse engineering because you can't ever know what were the margins for sure of these slide recesses. So let's carry this forward, because we've had a lot of conversations with gunsmiths and other companies that would seem to be like competitors with us, but not. And the general belief, or as we understand it, is, and I got an aftermarket barrel here with me with this slide purposely because it is frankly a little on the tight side. And it would need some fitting in order to be not a risk of becoming a cutter of the slide recesses. The general understanding, I guess you'd say, is that the tighter this fit is, the more accurate my high power is going to be. And this is another illusion, if you will, that happened because we believe nobody had gotten yet an appreciation for the importance of, believe it or not, fresh springs in your handgun. In other words, if I have this old high power, it's been around for 20 years and I've shot it a lot and everything, and now I want to get a new barrel and I want to have it fitted to my slide. Imagine that sequence. So I've got a worn out recoil spring. I've got a worn out hammer spring, which is part of your recoil control, and I want better accuracy in my high power. And I take it and I get an aftermarket barrel and I take it to the gunsmith and he fits it and it fits, and I mean, I'm telling you, there's just blissfully no movement in that slide at all, and I think I've got everything great, and I go to the range and I shoot, and by golly, this thing seriously is accurate. A noticeable improvement over what I had before. And this is, we believe, the source of a big illusion. The reason it was a source of a big illusion is because it works. To a point, it works. And this is where this gets a little bit, you have to kind of go with me on this for a second. A worn out recoil spring will be weak on the front end, and this is what I call the front end. The front end is when the recoil spring is least compressed in its application. At this point, the recoil spring has less resistance than at any other point during the slide's cycle, because during the rest of the slide cycle, it's compressed more than it is now, or it's decompressing and it's a dimensional length less than it is now. That means it's pushing more as the slide is recoiling. But now on the front end, the integrity or the freshness of this spring is more important on the front end than on the back end, actually, because this is a substantial amount of your recoil control. Why this is important, and this is an important thing, is when you fire the high power and that slide starts to recoil, it can go rearward 4 millimeters and then the barrel starts to move. You must have sufficient resistance on the front end so that it retards the movement of the slide long enough to get the bullet out of the end of the barrel. If you've not done that, you have a bullet moving out the end of a moving barrel, and that's the reason that accuracy goes away as spring integrity goes away. So that's the other part here that you're going to notice is, now assuming that we do have a good spring in this high power, it is pressing with quite a bit of force. I've got to compress it that much at that point. That pressure is keeping this barrel automatically in the rearward part of those slide recesses. If it has any movement at all, it's keeping it in that rearward position. And this is constant pressure. It's continuous and variable, and when the slide starts to recoil, there's no reason to think that this barrel moves this direction. That's not happening. In other words, if this barrel is fitting in these slide recesses and it's got a little bit of movement to it, or it has zero, if you have a good fresh recoil spring in your high power, it is going to keep this barrel anchored in the rear part of those slide recesses regardless. If this is a weak spring, it's possible, yes, that this slide either moves too fast and the barrel unlocks from the slide and cams down before the bullet leaves the end of the barrel. Yes, that just plays havoc with accuracy when a bullet is leaving the end of a moving barrel. But under conditions where you have a fresh recoil spring that gives you the front end resistance that you need, this is constant pressure keeping that barrel in the rear of the slide recesses. It's not going anywhere, whether it fits tight in those recesses or it doesn't. And this is where the myth breaks down, really, is when you understand that concept. Now you understand, well, how is it possible that a barrel that has been shot a lot, the original one for this high power, that has, you can hear and you can even see, it has a little bit of movement, and you can hear the rattle there when it's like that. It's not like that when the recoil spring is installed. There's nothing like that. In fact, it's very, very difficult to move that barrel now against the resistance of this recoil spring. Easier to move that barrel against the resistance of a worn out recoil spring. So again, we're back to this subject of movement of the barrel and accuracy, but it's coming down to a spring. It's not coming down to even the fit of the lugs in the recesses. And we're not going so far as to say the fit of the lug in the recesses is not important. It is important, yes. but it has limited importance because of. So back to this illusion that, okay, I put in this barrel and the barrel lugs and the slide recesses fit. It's just unbelievable. It's absolutely tight. It's incredible, and I have better accuracy, and I can prove it. And there's a worn out recoil spring in that picture. Yes, both the friction, the resistance of that ultra tight relationship between the barrel lugs and the slide recesses, yes, it can give you better accuracy if you are compensating for a worn out spring. And it's the only thing that's going to give you better accuracy if what's really happening is you're compensating for a spring with a hard part. It was one of the motivations for this high power university, because for decades, gunsmiths, optimization companies, they compensated all the time for either inappropriate springs or worn out springs with alterations to hard parts. This is something that you want to be on the lookout for with some of your older high powers, especially if they've been to a customization company or a gunsmith, is have hard parts been altered in order to compensate for springs that could have accomplished the same thing. So what I've attempted to essentially explain to you is that to keep this barrel in position, dead rock solid, in position, stable, so that it is absolutely not moving when the bullet leaves the end of the barrel. This is key. You can do that, and you can do it in a couple of different ways. You can do it with a spring, or you can do it with the metal to metal relationships of the high power barrel to the slide. What we found and what we proved is you can do that with a spring. And for all intents and purposes, we do believe that the high power barrel, as blueprinted by John Browning or Dieudonné Save, either one, and the slide recesses as blueprinted by one of those two men as well. This was the best possible scenario for the high power pistol's accuracy, and for its longevity, and for its ability to shoot a lot without locking up, and so that the barrel lugs do not become cutters or a saw with respect to those slide recesses. So that is the conclusion of ours, is the FN Browning barrels and the dimensions, the specifications are absolutely optimal. They also got it right with a 17-pound recoil spring. It's the reason why mine, when I bought it, was a tack driver right out of the box. There is not room for improvement with respect to the original FN Browning's dimensions and how they fit in a slide. If anything, we deem those specifications by FN Browning as perfect, and everything that has been attempted by reverse engineering is inferior, if for no other reason because a less than precise fit of those barrel lugs and those slide recesses with the correct margins, anything less than that is going to either be way too loose, or it's going to be so tight that you start premature wear problems. And that seems to be, without an awful lot of shooting, that seems to have happened for a lot of guys. So next time we're going to dig right into some close-ups of some barrels differences and things, and we're going to talk about those things in the next session. Thanks for joining us for this one. I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com.